A young girl disappeared from a small town's Sunday market, vanishing in the blink of an eye. 2 years passed, marked by an agonizing void. Then, a mundane act, slicing a loaf of bread, revealed a clue, a tiny object embedded within, that shattered the silence and reignited a mother's desperate hope. Sarah Peterson sat in the stark, windowless interview room of the Oakdale Police Department, a space that had become a grim fixture in her life over the past 2 years. The pale green walls seemed to absorb light and hope, and the soft, persistent hum of the fluorescent lights overhead cast deep shadows under Sarah's tired eyes. She recounted the day her 12-year-old daughter, Emily, vanished, the words feeling worn and mechanical from countless repetitions. "We got to the market around 9, Sarah said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. Emily was in such a good mood that morning. She'd been looking forward to it all week." She paused, taking a shaky breath, forcing herself back to that bright Sunday morning at the farmer's market. Emily's excitement had been palpable. She was eager to visit the local vendors, particularly the ones selling fresh pastries. Sarah remembered allowing her daughter to walk just a few stalls ahead, captivated by a display of handmade bracelets, while Sarah paid for the produce she had selected. It was just 3 minutes of separation, a brief moment of diverted attention that had stretched into an eternity of anguish. When Sarah looked up, Emily was gone, swallowed by the crowd, leaving no trace, no whisper of where she might have gone. Detective Reynolds, a man in his early 50s with grizzled hair and a face weathered by years in the field, sat across the metal table. His notepad was open, a silent witness to the stagnant state of the case. He hadn't written anything new in months. Sarah noticed the way his pen hovered above the paper, as if anticipating the sudden emergence of a crucial detail she might have forgotten, a detail that had eluded them all this time. Her gaze drifted towards the wall, her mind replaying the painful memory. "She was so happy that morning," Sarah murmured, her voice catching, thick with emotion. Chatting about that fantasy series she loved so much, the Moonstone Chronicles. She had just started the 5th book and couldn't stop talking about what might happen to Princess Arya. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. I can almost hear her theories now. Just before everything went quiet, she pressed her lips together, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. When I looked up, she was gone. Just vanished. No trace. The last words were barely a whisper, swallowed by the sterile quiet of the room. "I know this is difficult," Reynolds said, his voice gentle but professional, a tone Sarah had come to associate with the endless cycle of hope and disappointment. "But going over these details again might help us see something we missed before." Sarah nodded, though she didn't believe it. They had analyzed that Sunday morning hundreds of times, dissecting every second, interviewing every vendor, every shopper they could find. Nothing had ever come of it. Detective Reynolds slid a folder toward her, containing the latest field reports from the patrol officers who still occasionally followed up on Emily's case. He spoke in a gentle tone, explaining that they had interviewed 3 more people who responded to the renewed flyers Sarah had distributed last month, but none of the leads had panned out. Sarah nodded mechanically, the routine of disappointment having become a bitter part of her existence. The folder contained the same photos she had long since memorized. Emily, before she disappeared. The sight of her daughter's face, frozen in that last moment of happiness, sent a familiar jolt of pain through Sarah's chest. "We're not giving up," Reynolds assured her, though they both knew the harsh reality. After 2 years, the chances of finding Emily diminished with each passing day. Missing children cases rarely ended happily after so much time had elapsed. Sarah reached in her bag and pulled out a small notebook, filled with her own meticulously documented observations and leads. As a former elementary school librarian, organization had always been her strength, and she had applied those skills to her daughter's case with a desperate, all-consuming intensity. She flipped through pages of handwritten notes, cross-references, and annotated maps of the town and surrounding areas. "I've been thinking about the delivery man who mentioned seeing a girl who looked like Emily near Westlake Park last month," she said, her finger tracing a line of her neat handwriting. I went there every day for a week at the same time, but didn't see anything. But what if we expanded the search radius? What if he saw her on her way somewhere else? Reynolds watched her with a mixture of admiration and concern. He had seen how Sarah's relentless pursuit had consumed her life, forcing her to take an extended leave from a school where she once found joy in introducing children to the world of books. Her persistence was remarkable and heartbreaking to witness. "We'll look into it," he promised, though they both knew it was likely another dead end, another thread that would unravel into nothingness. A sudden ringtone cut through the room's somber atmosphere, a jarring intrusion. Sarah fumbled in her bag for her special phone, the one with a number printed on all of Emily's missing posters, the line dedicated solely for tips about her daughter. Her hands trembled slightly as she extracted the phone, a flicker of hope lighting her features despite the countless disappointments that had come before. "Hello," she answered, her voice carefully controlled, a tightrope walk between desperate hope and practiced composure. Detective Reynolds straightened in his chair, his gaze fixed on Sarah, watching her expression shift from cautious hope to stunned disbelief. The color drained from her face as she listened to the caller. Her free hand gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening with strain. "You found what?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, a fragile thread in the sudden tension of the room. Reynolds leaned forward, concern etched on his face. "I'll be right there," Sarah said, ending the call. She looked up at Reynolds, her eyes wide and disbelieving. "That was Maria Davis." Sarah's voice broke, the composure shattering. A fifth-grade teacher from a neighborhood just a few streets away. She found Emily's bracelet in a loaf of bread. Sarah's knuckles turned white as she gripped the steering wheel of her sedan, following Detective Reynolds' police cruiser through the familiar streets of their small town. Her mind raced with possibilities, but also with the painful knowledge of too many false alarms over the past 2 years to fully embrace hope. There was the psychic who claimed Emily was near water, conveniently vague in a town with a lake. The reported sighting at a mall 3 counties over that turned out to be a different child. And the cruel anonymous caller who demanded money for information that never materialized. Yet, something in Maria Davis's voice sounded different this time. Genuine shock, not misplaced certainty or malicious intent. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the residential streets as Sarah followed Reynolds' car into a quiet subdivision of ranch-style homes. The neighborhood was typical of Oakdale: neat lawns, modest houses, bicycles abandoned in driveways by children called in for dinner. It was the kind of place where people assumed they were safe, where parents let their children play outside without constant supervision. Sarah had once believed that, too, before her world was irrevocably altered. They pulled up to a yellow house with white trim and neatly tended flower beds. Sarah recognized it as Maria Davis's home. She had been here once for a school function before Emily disappeared. That felt like another lifetime, a time when Sarah still had PTA meetings and school events on her calendar instead of police appointments and search efforts. Maria Davis opened the door to her modest ranch-style home before they could even knock, her face pale with concern. As a fifth-grade teacher at Oakdale Elementary, she knew Emily well, having had her in class the year before she disappeared. She was a petite woman in her mid-40s with short auburn hair and kind eyes now filled with worry. "Sarah," she said, reaching out to squeeze Sarah's arm, a gesture of shared grief and sudden, unsettling discovery. "Detective Reynolds, thank you for coming so quickly." Sarah stepped inside, noticing the familiar smell of chalk and art supplies that seemed to cling to teachers even in their homes. Detective Reynolds followed, his presence a solid and reassuring anchor behind her. The house was neat but clearly lived in, with stacks of papers to be graded on the dining table and framed student artwork on the walls. Sarah spotted one of Emily's watercolor paintings, a multicolored dragon soaring over a castle, and her throat tightened, a sudden, sharp pang of memory. "It's in the kitchen," Maria said, leading them through the living room. "I was going to make a sandwich for lunch when—" She trailed off, shaking her head in disbelief. Maria led them to her kitchen, where a partially sliced loaf of bread sat on a wooden cutting board. A serrated bread knife rested beside it, the blade reflecting the overhead lights. Sarah noticed immediately that something unusual protruded from the cut surface, a scattering of alternating purple and blue beads embedded within the bread itself. As she leaned closer, her breath caught in her throat. A heart-shaped amethyst pendant was partially visible among the beads, nestled within the soft interior of the loaf. She didn't need to examine it closely to know what it was. It was Emily's bracelet, the one she had given her daughter for her 10th birthday, the same one visible on her wrist in the market photos from the day she disappeared. I was slicing the bread, and the knife hit something hard, Maria explained, her voice shaking slightly, still processing the shock of her discovery. At first, I thought it was just a hard spot in the dough, but then I saw the beads, and then I recognized the heart pendant. She looked at Sarah, her eyes filled with sympathy and confusion. I couldn't believe it. I remember Emily wearing it at school. Sarah instinctively reached toward it, but Detective Reynolds gently caught her wrist, shaking his head. "We need to preserve any potential evidence," he explained softly, his voice firm but understanding. He took out his phone and carefully photographed the bread from multiple angles, documenting the scene before using gloved hands to delicately extract the bracelet. The pendant and beads appeared remarkably intact despite having gone through a baking oven, and the cord was only slightly discolored, made of a heat-resistant material that had somehow survived the intense heat of the baking process. Sarah collapsed into a kitchen chair, clutching the edge of the table for support as tears streamed down her face, tears of shock, of disbelief, of a fragile, terrifying hope. She spoke in a broken whisper, confirming to Detective Reynolds that this was undoubtedly Emily's bracelet. Maria explained that she had bought the bread yesterday evening from Franklin's Bakery on Main Street, a well-established local business run by the same family for generations. "Do you still have a wrapper or bag from the bread?" Reynolds asked, placing the bracelet carefully in an evidence bag. Maria nodded, retrieving a paper bag from the recycling bin under her sink. Franklin's Bakery was printed in gold lettering across the white bag, with a date stamp from yesterday clearly visible. I don't understand," Sarah whispered, staring at the bracelet in the evidence bag, her mind reeling. How could Emily's bracelet end up in a loaf of bread? After 2 years, Detective Reynolds carefully took the bracelet from Sarah, sealing the evidence bag while explaining they would need to confirm it forensically, though he didn't doubt Sarah's identification. "We're going to find out," Reynolds assured her, his voice firm with renewed determination. "This is the first tangible lead we've had in Emily's case. We'll go to Franklin's Bakery immediately." Sarah nodded in understanding, having learned much about police procedure over the past 2 years of working closely with law enforcement. She stood up shakily, gathering her composure, a flicker of her former strength returning. "I'm coming with you," she said, her voice steady. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of absolute resolve. Reynolds considered arguing, but recognized the unwavering determination in her eyes. "Stay with me at all times," he conceded, knowing there was no dissuading her. "And let me do the talking." Sarah sat in Detective Reynolds's unmarked police car, parked across the street from Franklin's Bakery. The late morning sun glinted off the bakery's large front windows, where fresh loaves of bread and tempting pastries were artfully displayed. The brick building, with its striped awning and gold-lettered sign, had been a fixture in downtown Oakdale for as long as Sarah could remember. The scent of fresh bread wafted across the street, a smell that once brought comfort and warmth, but now made her stomach clench with a knot of anxiety and dread. She watched as plainclothes officers entered the establishment while uniformed police created a perimeter, their movements practiced and efficient, a silent indication that this was a serious investigation. Reynolds had insisted she stay in the car, promising to return with news as soon as possible. Through the bakery windows, she could see the officers speaking with an older man she recognized as George Franklin, the bakery's owner and primary baker. He appeared to be responding calmly, gesturing toward the back of the shop as he spoke with the officers, seemingly cooperative and unfazed. Time slowed to an excruciating crawl as Sarah waited, her mind swimming with a torrent of possibilities, theories, and fears. The bakery was one of the places she had distributed flyers when Emily first disappeared. She remembered George Franklin, the elderly owner, expressing his sympathy and promising to keep an eye out. He had even generously donated bread for the volunteer search parties that had combed the woods and parks in those first desperate weeks, a gesture that had seemed kind and supportive at the time. Sarah watched the police activity, her thoughts a chaotic jumble. How could her daughter's bracelet have ended up in bread from this shop? Was it placed there at the bakery? During delivery? At the distribution center? The number of people who might have had contact with that dough before it became bread seemed overwhelming, a vast network of possibilities. Through the windshield, Sarah observed the police methodically working their way through the bakery. One officer appeared to be taking photographs of the kitchen area, visible through the swinging door at the back of the shop. Another spoke with a young cashier, a college-age girl Sarah didn't recognize. The activity inside seemed thorough, but unhurried, suggesting they hadn't found anything immediately alarming or overtly suspicious. A group of curious onlookers gathered at the police perimeter, their expressions a mix of concern, morbid curiosity, and hushed speculation. Sarah sank lower in her seat, not wanting to be recognized, not wanting to become the focus of their whispered conversations. Since Emily's disappearance, she had become an unwilling local celebrity, the subject of sympathetic glances and averted gazes whenever she ventured into town. Some people avoided her entirely, as if her tragedy might be contagious, a dark cloud to be steered clear of. Others approached with awkward condolences or, worse, invasive questions, probing the depths of her grief. The isolation had been nearly as painful as the loss itself. Detective Reynolds finally emerged from the bakery after nearly 2 hours, his expression grim as he slid into the driver's seat. He smelled faintly of flour and yeast as he turned to Sarah and shook his head, a gesture that spoke volumes. The officers found nothing suspicious in the bakery, he explained, his voice tinged with disappointment. George Franklin appeared genuinely shocked about the bracelet and was fully cooperative. He explained that Franklin had provided documentation showing he received pre-made dough from Midwest Baking Distribution, a large company that supplied dozens of bakeries throughout the state. Sarah's fragile hope deflated, the possibilities expanding into a dishearteningly wide scope. So, it could have been put in the bread anywhere along the way, she asked, her voice small. At the distribution center? During transport? Reynolds nodded, confirming her fears. Franklin even called his supplier while we were present, trying to help trace the source. The representative confirmed they supplied dough to at least 30 bakeries in a 3-state area. Reynolds sighed, explaining that this complicated the investigation significantly. They would need to examine the entire supply chain, from the distribution company to its suppliers of raw ingredients, to determine precisely how Emily's bracelet ended up in the bread. What about Franklin himself? Sarah asked, a lingering question in her mind. Did he seem suspicious in any way? Not particularly, Reynolds replied. He seemed genuinely concerned and offered to provide any assistance he could. He's been running that bakery for over 30 years. Has no criminal record, not even a parking ticket. There's nothing to indicate he'd be involved in Emily's disappearance. Sarah stared out the window at the bakery, studying its seemingly innocent facade. So what now? Reynolds started the car and pulled away from the bakery. He told Sarah they needed to go back to the station to process the bracelet as evidence, to collect forensic information that might provide further clues. We'll start by contacting the distribution center, he explained, outlining the next steps. Getting records of everyone who might have handled that particular batch of dough. And we'll check if any of their employees have connections to Emily's case or similar incidents. The drive back to the station was mostly silent, Sarah staring out the window at the familiar streets, now transformed by the surreal events of the day. The town passed by in a blur of spring colors, blooming dogwoods, fresh green grass, flower beds bright with tulips. It was the same season as when Emily disappeared, and the vivid similarity made Sarah's chest ache with a familiar, deep-seated pain. At the station, Sarah waited in a plastic chair beneath the harsh fluorescent lights while forensic technicians meticulously photographed, measured, and swabbed the bracelet. She watched through a window as they worked, treating the small piece of jewelry with the reverence and care of the vital evidence it was. Every so often, one of the technicians glanced up at her, their expression a mixture of professional focus and personal sympathy, a silent acknowledgement of her suffering. After an hour, Reynolds approached with paperwork for her to sign. Since the bracelet was technically her property and held tremendous personal value, she could take it home, provided she agreed to make it available if they needed it again for further examination or court proceedings. Sarah signed the forms, her hands steady despite the emotional turmoil, and accepted the evidence bag containing the bracelet. The ride home was quiet, Reynolds promising to call the moment they learned anything new about the distribution center. As they pulled up to her house, the setting sun cast long shadows across her front lawn. The mailbox overflowed with flyers and catalogs she hadn't bothered to collect in days, a small sign of how consumed her life had become by the search for Emily. A porch light she had left on that morning glowed weakly in the dusk, a lonely beacon. Sarah thanked him, stepped out of the car, and walked up her driveway. She unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and leaned against it after it closed, overwhelmed by the emotional weight of the day, the roller coaster of hope and dashed expectations. The bracelet in its evidence bag felt impossibly heavy in her hand, both a tangible connection to her missing daughter and a stark reminder of how little they truly knew about what had happened to Emily. Sarah pushed herself away from the door and made her way to the living room, where she slumped onto the sofa, the familiar comfort offering little solace. The air conditioner hummed steadily, the only sound in the otherwise silent house, a stark contrast to the turmoil in her mind. She placed the evidence bag containing Emily's bracelet on the coffee table and stared at it, the purple heart pendant visible through the clear plastic. This tangible connection to her missing daughter felt like both a blessing and a curse. The first real evidence in 2 years, yet it offered no immediate answers about Emily's whereabouts or what precisely had happened to her. Jennifer, changed to Sarah, rose and walked down the hallway to what was once her home office. She pushed open the door to the room her sister now called the War Room, a space entirely dedicated to finding Emily. The walls were covered with maps of the town and surrounding areas, marked with colored pins indicating where searches had been conducted and possible sightings had been reported. A large corkboard displayed a timeline of the case, with index cards noting each lead, interview, and search effort. Newspaper clippings about similar cases were pinned alongside printouts of missing children statistics and child recovery stories, a desperate attempt to find patterns or glean hope from the experiences of others. Stacks of missing person flyers in various designs sat on the desk, ready for distribution at a moment's notice. A bookshelf held binders of organized information, witness statements, police reports, and Sarah's own detailed notes, a testament to her tireless dedication. The room was illuminated by a single desk lamp, casting the maps and photos in a harsh, focused light that seemed to create more shadows than clarity, mirroring the uncertainty of the case itself. Sarah flipped on the overhead light, flooding the room with a brighter, less atmospheric glow, and moved to the largest map, a detailed rendering of Oakdale and the surrounding area. Sarah's fingers traced along a red string connecting the Sunday market, where Emily disappeared, to various points of interest, including the middle school Emily would have attended, the park she loved, and the lake where one supposed psychic claimed she might be found. Franklin's Bakery was marked on the map, but only as one of many businesses in the downtown area where Sarah had distributed flyers in the desperate early days of the search. There was no string connecting it to any theory of Emily's disappearance. No logical link until now. Sarah stared at the bakery's pin, wondering about the complex supply chain Detective Reynolds had described. How many facilities would the dough pass through before becoming bread? How, in that extensive process, could Emily's bracelet have entered? She didn't add any new connections yet, not having enough information to form a coherent theory. But she circled the bakery's location with a red marker, noting it as the improbable end point where her daughter's bracelet had mysteriously surfaced after 2 long years. The shrill ring of the house phone startled Sarah from her thoughts, a sudden intrusion into the quiet intensity of the war room. She hurried to the kitchen to answer it, her heart leaping with the hope that it might be Reynolds with news, though she knew it was more likely to be her sister checking in, as she did every evening, a constant source of support. "Hello," Sarah answered, her voice still slightly breathless from the sudden adrenaline. "Hello, Sarah. It's me." Her sister Karen's voice came through the line, warm and familiar. "How are you doing today?" Sarah hesitated, unsure where to begin, how to convey the seismic shift that had occurred in her world. "Something happened, Karen," she said, her voice trembling. "Something big." She explained about the bracelet found in the bread, the investigation at Franklin's bakery, and the current dead end with the distribution center. Karen listened without interrupting, gasping softly when Sarah described recognizing Emily's bracelet, embedded within the loaf like a hidden treasure. "That's incredible," Karen said finally, her voice filled with awe and trepidation. Do you think this means she's alive?" The question hung in the air, the possibility both exhilarating and terrifying, a fragile balloon threatening to burst. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, the uncertainty a heavy weight in her chest. "But it means something. It's the first real evidence we've had in 2 years." After promising to call if anything new developed, and assuring Karen she would try to eat something, Sarah hung up and returned to the war room, drawn back by the pull of the mystery. The photo album from the day of Emily's disappearance sat open on her desk, displaying the last pictures taken before her daughter vanished. Sarah hadn't looked at these photos in months. The pain of seeing Emily's smiling face, unaware of the tragedy that was about to unfold, had become too much to bear on a regular basis. But now, with the bracelet providing the first real lead in 2 years, she forced herself to examine every detail with fresh eyes, searching for anything at all, that might have seemed insignificant before but could be crucial now. The market had been bustling that day, filled with dozens of vendors selling everything from fresh produce to handcrafted jewelry. The photos captured slices of that vibrant atmosphere. Emily examining flowers at one stall, Sarah and Emily sharing a pastry at another. Emily posing beside a display of colorful vegetables, her bright turquoise, sleeveless dress standing out against the backdrop of the market. In one photo, Emily stood near the bread stall, holding a small wicker basket containing pastries and bread rolls, her bright turquoise, sleeveless dress visible, her braces showing as she smiled widely, a picture of innocent happiness. Her purple and blue beaded bracelet was clearly visible on her wrist, a small detail that now held immense significance. Behind her was a bread stall with colorful sunflower-patterned tablecloths and baskets of various baked goods arranged in neat rows. Sarah's eyes widened as she recognized the vendor standing directly behind Emily, George Franklin in his white baker's cap and shirt, the same baker who had shown the police his supply documentation earlier today. He was clearly visible in the frame, smiling faintly as he arranged bread in a display basket just a few feet behind her daughter. Sarah sat back, stunned by the connection. She didn't recall the police ever mentioning that they had interviewed Franklin as a potential witness, at least not until today, after the bracelet was found in his bread. Perhaps he had seen something, someone watching Emily, or noticed which direction she went after leaving the bread stall. It was a slim possibility, but in the absence of anything else, it felt like a thread to pull. She pulled out her notebook and jotted down this new observation, circling it several times for emphasis. Then she flipped through the other photos from that day, looking more carefully at the backgrounds, searching for Franklin in any other shots. She found him in 2 more, once in the background as Emily examined a flower stall, and again as Sarah and Emily walked past his bread display. The realization that Franklin was so close to Emily on the day she disappeared sent a chill down Sarah's spine. While it could be purely coincidental, given that Franklin's bakery was a regular fixture at the Sunday market, the fact that Emily's bracelet had turned up in bread from a shop after all this time seemed too strange to dismiss as mere chance. Sarah turned to her computer, and searched for information about George Franklin. The bakery's website was simple and outdated, mentioning only that Franklin's had been an Oakdale institution for over 30 years, owned and operated by George Franklin, a third-generation baker. There was little personal information about the man himself. A social media search yielded only a basic business page for the bakery, with photographs of breads and pastries, but nothing about Franklin personally. It seemed the baker had maintained a minimal online presence, unusual in this digital age, but not unheard of for someone of his generation. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind racing with possibilities, her thoughts a tangled web of suspicion and fragile hope. Could Franklin have seen something crucial on the day Emily disappeared? Could he somehow be connected to her disappearance? The coincidence felt too significant to ignore, yet she had nothing concrete, no solid evidence, to justify her growing suspicion. She knew she should call Detective Reynolds with this discovery, but she hesitated. The police had just finished interviewing Franklin today and had found nothing suspicious. Would they take her seriously if she called now with what amounted to a coincidence? That Franklin happened to be in photos from the market that day? Of course, he was there. His bakery had a stall. It wasn't, on its own, evidence of anything nefarious. Still, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this connection mattered, that it was more than just a random happenstance. She resolved to speak with Franklin herself, not as a detective, but casually, to see if he remembered anything about that day. Perhaps he had noticed Emily at his stall or seen her afterward. At the very least, she might learn something, however small, about how her daughter's bracelet had ended up in his bread 2 years later. Decision made, Sarah closed the photo album and checked the time. It was nearly 9 o'clock in the evening, but she knew bakeries often operated on early schedules, with bakers beginning their work in the pre-dawn hours. She would visit Franklin's first thing in the morning, when the baker would likely be preparing the day's goods. She set her alarm for 5:30 a.m. and tried to get some sleep, but rest eluded her, her mind too active, too full of unanswered questions. Sarah tossed and turned, sleep a distant luxury, her mind racing with the swirling possibilities. The images from the market photos kept replaying in her mind. Emily smiling, Franklin in the background, the bracelet on her daughter's wrist. Could the baker have seen something crucial that day? Could he have been overlooked in the initial investigation, his presence at the market dismissed as routine? The questions circled endlessly, preventing any possibility of rest. She glanced at the clock. 2:17 a.m. bakers typically started work in the pre-dawn hours to prepare for the morning rush of customers. On a sudden impulse, a wave of restless energy propelling her, she decided to drive to Franklin's bakery. He might already be there, preparing the day's goods. This could be her chance to speak with him without the interruptions of customers or other staff present, a private conversation that might yield some answers. Sarah quickly dressed, grabbed her keys, and headed downtown. The streets were deserted at this hour, the streetlights casting pools of yellow light on the empty sidewalks. Oakdale was not a place with much nightlife. Even the bars closed by 1 o'clock a.m. on weeknights. She passed only one other car, a police cruiser that slowed briefly as it passed her. The officer inside, perhaps curious about a lone car at this hour, before continuing on its patrol. As she approached the bakery, she noticed lights glowing from within despite the closed sign displayed in the window, confirming her hunch that Franklin started his workday while the rest of the town slept. Jennifer parked across the street, gathering her courage before deciding to approach the store. Part of her knew this was impulsive, potentially even reckless, a move driven by desperation rather than logic, but the overwhelming need for answers outweighed caution. Through the windows, she could see movement in the back of the bakery. A figure, presumably Franklin, moved between the counters, preparing for the day's bake. From this distance, she couldn't make out exactly what he was doing, but the activity confirmed her assumption that he was there. Sarah crossed the street and approached the front door. There was a small side door nearby, probably used for deliveries, and, as she hesitated by the main entrance, this side door suddenly opened. George Franklin emerged, carrying what appeared to be a garbage bag. He was wearing the same white baker's uniform she recognized from the market photos, though now it was dusted with flour, a sign of his early morning work. He froze when he saw Sarah standing near the entrance, clearly surprised by her presence at this hour. "We're closed," he called out, his voice gruff, a mixture of surprise and suspicion in his tone. "Won't open until 6. Sarah stepped forward into the pool of light cast by the bakery windows, her heart pounding in her chest. "Mr. Franklin, I'm Sarah Peterson, Emily Peterson's mother. I was hoping I could speak with you for a moment." Recognition dawned on Franklin's face, a look of stark, unavoidable acknowledgement. The look Sarah had seen countless times, the one given to the mother whose daughter's face was displayed on posters in his own window. He hesitated, glancing back at the bakery door before setting the garbage bag down beside a dumpster. He approached cautiously, wiping his hands on his apron, his movements betraying a slight unease. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm sorry, but this is a strange hour for a visit." Sarah nodded, acutely aware of how unusual this must seem, how out of place she was here in the pre-dawn quiet. "I know, and I apologize. I couldn't sleep, and I remembered Baker's work early hours." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The police were here earlier about the bracelet found in one of your loaves." Franklin's expression softened slightly with what appeared to be sympathy, though a flicker of guardedness remained in his eyes. "Yes, a terrible business. I told the officers I have no idea how something like that could happen. I get my dough from Midwest distribution. Whatever was in it didn't come from my shop." "I understand," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady, to maintain a calm demeanor despite the storm of emotions churning within her. "But I was looking through some photos from the day Emily disappeared, and I noticed you were there at the market. Your stall was right near where Emily was last seen." Franklin appeared to consider this, his gaze distant for a moment, before unlocking the door, a silent invitation to come inside. "Why don't you come inside? It's chilly out here, and I've just made fresh coffee." Sarah hesitated only briefly before following him into the warmth and inviting aroma of the bakery. The familiar scent of baking bread enveloped her, bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. Emily had loved fresh bread, had always begged to stop at bakeries whenever they passed one. Franklin offered her a chair at a small table in the corner of the front area, then disappeared briefly into the back of the shop, returning with 2 steaming mugs of coffee and a plate of fresh baked rolls. "Just came out of the oven," he explained, setting them down. "Thank you," Sarah said, though she had no appetite, her stomach tied in knots. She took a sip of the hot coffee, gathering her thoughts, trying to find a way to steer the conversation towards her growing suspicions. "Mr. Franklin," she began, her voice soft but direct, "were you ever interviewed by the police after Emily disappeared?" Franklin sat across from her, his weathered hands cupping his coffee mug, his gaze steady. "Briefly. They spoke to all the vendors of the market that day. I told them I didn't see anything unusual, which was true. It was a busy morning. Lots of customers." Sarah nodded, reaching into her bag and bringing out her phone. "I was looking at these pictures from that day." She showed Franklin the market photo on her phone, pointing to where he stood in the background behind Emily. "You were very close to where she was last seen." He studied the photo, shaking his head sadly, saying he remembered the day vaguely, but didn't notice anything suspicious. "I wish I could help you, Mrs. Peterson. That poor girl. Your daughter was such a bright thing. I remember her coming to the stall sometimes, always polite." As they talked, a detail caught Sarah's eye. She noticed a small bookshelf in the corner near the employee area with several volumes that looked familiar. She squinted to see the titles, then felt her heart skip a beat as she recognized the distinctive spines of the Moonstone Chronicles, the same obscure fantasy series that Emily had been completely obsessed with before her disappearance. The coincidence seemed too striking, too improbable to ignore. The series wasn't particularly popular or widely available. Sarah had had to special order the books from a specific bookstore 2 towns over. She had never met another child who read them, let alone an adult. Sarah commented on the books, trying to sound casual, mentioning what a remarkable coincidence it was since her daughter had loved that exact series. "They're not very well known," she said, watching his reaction closely. "Emily was obsessed with Princess Arya and her moonstone magic. Franklin appeared visibly startled by her observation, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. He quickly explained that he enjoyed reading all sorts of books in his spare time. "I like to read a bit of everything," he said, perhaps a little too quickly. "Fantasy helps pass the time during slow afternoons." "Who's your favorite character?" Sarah asked casually, a simple question that any true fan of the series would have a ready answer for. Sarah knew Emily's favorite character was Princess Arya, but any character from the series would suffice as a test. When Sarah asked about his favorite character from the series, knowing any true fan would have one, Franklin stumbled awkwardly, clearly unfamiliar with the content of the books. His answer revealed that he had never actually read them. "Oh, I like the main boy with the sword," he offered vaguely, though there was no such character in the female-led fantasy series. He became visibly uncomfortable, fidgeting with his apron and avoiding eye contact. "I got them at a library sale," he muttered, his earlier warmth evaporating, a defensiveness entering his tone, "though I haven't had time to read them yet." He glanced nervously at the clock on the wall, then abruptly stood. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Peterson, but I have much to do before opening. The morning bake won't prepare itself." Sarah took the hint, thanking him for the coffee and apologizing for the intrusion, her mind reeling from the strange interaction. As she left the bakery, her thoughts raced with a multitude of questions. Why would this baker, who claimed to have no connection to her daughter, have this specific, obscure series that Emily loved? And why had he become so nervous and evasive when she asked about it? Outside in her car, Sarah sat gripping the steering wheel, her heart pounding in her chest. The coincidence of finding Emily's bracelet in bread from Franklin's bakery, followed by the discovery that he owned the same obscure book series Emily loved, felt far too significant to be mere chance. His nervous reaction when questioned about the books only heightened her suspicion. She reached for her phone to call Reynolds, then hesitated. What would she say? That Franklin owned books her daughter liked? That he seemed nervous when questioned about them? It was hardly concrete evidence of wrongdoing, not enough to warrant a major police response. Still, combined with finding the bracelet in his bread and his presence at the market the day Emily disappeared, Sarah couldn't shake the growing feeling that George Franklin knew more than he was telling, that there was a hidden connection. She tried calling Reynolds, but got his voicemail. This time, she left a detailed message, explaining her strange interaction with Franklin and the unsettling discovery of the rare book series. She knew how circumstantial the evidence sounded, even as she described it, but she felt compelled to share it. These books were special ordered for Emily, she explained in the message, her voice urgent. They weren't bestsellers you'd pick up anywhere, and he clearly hasn't read them, despite claiming they're his. She ended with a plea for Reynolds to call her back as soon as possible, her hope now laced with a growing sense of unease and foreboding. Sarah debated going home, knowing she should wait for proper police support, but something, an instinct she couldn't ignore, kept her rooted in place. She decided to wait and watch the bakery for another hour, just to see if anything unusual happened, if there was any further indication of something hidden beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary bakery. The minutes ticked by slowly as Sarah observed the bakery from her vantage point across the street. Franklin moved back and forth behind the windows, a solitary figure in the pre-dawn light, preparing dough, checking ovens, and arranging baked goods on cooling racks. His movements were practiced and efficient, the motions of a man who had performed these tasks thousands of times, a master of his craft. Around 3:30 a.m., Sarah noticed Franklin leave through the side door again, this time carrying what appeared to be several small packages wrapped in brown paper. He placed them carefully in the trunk of an older model sedan parked in the small lot beside the bakery, then returned inside, his movements quick and furtive. 15 minutes later, he emerged once more with another package and added it to the car. The repeated trips, the careful handling of the packages, seemed unusual for a baker preparing for the day. 20 minutes later, Sarah noticed Franklin exit through the side door again, this time without a garbage bag or packages. He locked the door behind him and walked purposefully down the alley toward what appeared to be a storage building situated behind the bakery. The small shed-like structure sat about 50 feet behind the main bakery building, partially obscured by dumpsters and shadows. Sarah hadn't noticed it during her earlier visits to the bakery, nor had she seen the police officers approach it during their investigation that afternoon. Franklin looked around furtively before unlocking its door, checking over his shoulder in both directions before slipping inside, his movements quick and secretive. The secretive nature of his movements sent another chill down Sarah's spine. This did not seem like the behavior of a man simply checking on stored supplies. Sarah waited, watching the storage building intently. After approximately 10 minutes, Franklin emerged, locked the door carefully, and returned to the main bakery. His posture seemed different now, his shoulders tense, his movements more hurried, as if he were burdened by something, or perhaps relieved. Sarah's curiosity intensified, mingling with a growing sense of dread. The building didn't seem to be part of the main bakery space that the police had searched earlier, the area visible from the front windows. And Franklin's secretive behavior seemed odd for a man simply preparing the next day's bread, a routine task he had performed for decades. Perhaps he was hiding something in there, Sarah thought, her mind racing. Records related to his supply chain, information that might explain how Emily's bracelet ended up in the dough, or something far more sinister. She weighed her options. The responsible thing would be to wait for Reynolds, to let the police handle the investigation properly, with their resources and expertise. But what if Franklin removed whatever he was hiding before the police arrived? What if this was her only chance, the only opportunity to find a connection to Emily, to uncover the truth? Driven by a desperate need for answers, Sarah made a decision. She waited until Franklin returned to the main bakery before quietly leaving her car. The street remained deserted at this early hour. No witnesses to see her cross to the alley behind the bakery. She moved cautiously, staying close to the buildings and away from the pools of light cast by the street lamps, a shadow in the pre-dawn darkness. The storage building was a simple structure, about the size of a single-car garage, with weathered wooden siding and a metal roof. It matched the age and style of the main bakery building, suggesting it was built around the same time, perhaps originally used for coal or ice storage in the days before modern utilities. Sarah found the door locked, but a small window on the side provided a limited view inside. Using her phone's flashlight, dimmed under her fingers to avoid detection, she peered through the glass. The space appeared to be a standard storage area, filled with shelves of flour and other baking supplies. But something at the back caught her attention, a door that seemed out of place, newly installed compared to the rest of the building's aged interior. The interior door had a modern appearance, with a fresh coat of white paint that stood out starkly against the aged wood of the surrounding walls, a clear indication that it had been added recently. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she noticed a keypad lock on the door, a security measure that suggested it secured something far more valuable or secretive than just flour and sugar. Why would a simple storage shed for a small-town bakery need such sophisticated security? Sarah tried to see more, to get a better angle, but the limited size and angle of the window restricted her view. She considered trying to find another way to look inside, but she knew that would be trespassing, potentially compromising any evidence that might be crucial to finding Emily. Reluctantly, she retreated to her car, her suspicion now fully awakened, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. From her vantage point across the street, Sarah continued her surveillance. The lights in the main bakery remained on as Franklin continued his preparations for the day. Occasionally, he disappeared from view, presumably working in parts of the bakery not visible from the street. Around 4:15 a.m., Franklin emerged from the side door again, this time carrying what appeared to be a tray covered with a cloth, as if transporting something delicate or concealed. He made his way to the storage building, unlocked it, and disappeared inside. This time, he remained there longer, almost 20 minutes by Sarah's anxious count, before returning to the main bakery empty-handed. Just after 5 a.m., Franklin exited the bakery again, looking around cautiously before heading to the storage building. This time, he carried nothing, but his furtive, almost nervous manner sent another wave of unease through Sarah. She waited until he disappeared inside, then quietly moved closer, positioning herself near the small window on the side of the storage structure, driven by an irresistible urge to see what was happening. Through the window, she could see that the door with the keypad lock was now open, revealing a hidden room behind it. Franklin had entered this room, leaving the door ajar. From her angle, Sarah could see only a small portion of the hidden space, what appeared to be a small bed or cot against one wall, and a small table with a lamp. The realization hit her with stunning force, a sickening jolt. This wasn't just storage. It was some kind of living space. Sarah's heart pounded violently in her chest, a frantic drum against her ribs. Could Emily be in there? Could her daughter have been held captive in this hidden room all this time, just blocks from their home? The possibility seemed both incredible and horrifying, a nightmare come alive. She strained to see more, to catch a glimpse of whoever might be inside that room, but Franklin's body blocked most of her view. She heard voices, muffled and indistinct through the window glass in the distance, but she couldn't make out the words. Jennifer, changed to Sarah, retreated to her car, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she tried Reynolds' number again. Still no answer. She debated calling 911, the urgency building, but hesitated. What exactly would she report? That a baker had a secured room in his storage building? That he was bringing food to someone hidden there? It sounded paranoid, like the ramblings of a desperate mother, without concrete evidence, and a false alarm could jeopardize the entire investigation into Emily's disappearance, potentially alerting whoever was inside. She decided to wait a little longer, to see if she could gather more information, to confirm her terrifying suspicion. After a few minutes watching the storage building from her car, Sarah noticed that Franklin hadn't emerged from the hidden room. Her concern growing exponentially, she made a decisive, if risky, choice. She needed to hear what was happening in that room, to confirm if that was indeed Emily's voice she had heard. She quietly exited her vehicle and made her way back to the storage building, careful to stay in the shadows of the alley, her footsteps silent on the pavement. Sarah shifted position to get a better view through the small window, pressing herself against the rough siding of the shed. She could hear raised voices coming from the hidden room inside the storage building, the sounds clearer now. Franklin's voice echoed, sharp with anger, though she still couldn't make out the exact words. She pressed her ear closer to the glass, straining to hear, every nerve ending on high alert. "I trusted you," Franklin's voice echoed, sharp with anger. "How could you do this to me? After everything I've done for you?" The response came in a voice so hauntingly familiar, a voice she had longed to hear for 2 long years, that Sarah's breath caught in her throat, a strangled gasp. "I don't understand," the younger voice said, sounding frightened, confused. Sarah froze, her heart beginning to race, a frantic bird trapped in her chest. The voice, higher pitched than she remembered, with that slight tremor she knew so well. Could it be? "Don't play innocent with me," Franklin snapped, his voice cold and menacing. Sarah saw him slam something down on a small table inside the room, a sudden, jarring sound. Not a newspaper, as she first thought, but a printout of what looked like an email or a police notice, a document that had clearly enraged him. Someone found a bracelet in one of the bread loaves today, a purple heart bracelet with blue beads. Sarah's eyes widened in horror as she understood. The bracelet, her Emily's clue. "The police came here with your mother." "My mom." The young voice cracked with emotion, with disbelief and sudden, overwhelming hope. "She was here." Sarah's heart pounded violently in her chest, a deafening roar in her ears. The voice. It had to be. Could it possibly be Emily's? After 2 years, her daughter's voice would have changed somewhat, deepened, matured, but the cadence, the familiar rhythm of her words, the way they tumbled out, it sounded so much like her Emily. "You put that bracelet in the dough last night when I wasn't looking, didn't you?" Franklin's voice grew dangerously quiet, a chilling contrast to his earlier outburst. "No, it was an accident," the girl stammered, her voice trembling. "It must have fallen in when I was helping you arrange the dough." "Liar!" Franklin roared, his anger erupting again. Sarah saw him sweep his arm across the small table, knocking items to the floor of the confined space, a violent, frustrated gesture. 2 years. 2 years I've given you everything, and this is how you repay me. Sarah shifted position again, desperate to see who Franklin was speaking to confirm the impossible. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of a girl with long brown hair backing away from Franklin in the small room. When the girl turned slightly, Sarah gasped, a choked sob escaping her lips. Even in profile, even after 2 years of absence and growth, she recognized her daughter's face. Emily had grown taller, her face had thinned, and her hair was longer, falling in waves around her shoulders. But the large glasses frames were the same, and the way she held her shoulders when scared was unmistakable, a familiar posture that tore at Sarah's heart. Sarah clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob, the sound a ragged whisper. Emily was alive. Her daughter was alive, and had been here just blocks from their home for 2 long, agonizing years. The realization was both ecstatic and horrifying, a potent mix of unimaginable joy and gut-wrenching pain. "That's it," Franklin said, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of desperation and frustration. "We're done here. It's too risky to keep you here now." He grabbed a set of keys from his pocket, his voice regaining a chilling calmness. "You have 5 minutes to gather your things. We're leaving tonight, somewhere no one will ever find us." "No, please," Emily begged, trying to pull away from him in the confined space, her voice filled with terror. "I don't want to go." "This isn't a discussion," Franklin said coldly, his voice devoid of any trace of compassion. 5 minutes, or we leave with nothing." Sarah realized with chilling horror that her deepest, most terrifying suspicions were correct. Emily had been held captive in this hidden room all this time, secreted away from the world. And if Franklin took her away tonight, if he managed to disappear with her, Sarah might never see her daughter again. The urgency was now a crushing weight, a frantic drumbeat in her ears. She fumbled for her phone with shaking hands, her fingers fumbling with the keys, dialing Reynolds's number. To her immense relief, he answered promptly, his voice clear and professional, a lifeline in the chaos. "Detective Reynolds," he said in his professional tone. "It's Sarah Peterson," she whispered urgently, her voice trembling. "I found Emily. She's alive, at Franklin's Bakery storage building, behind the main store." "Sarah, slow down," Reynolds responded, his voice immediately alert, sensing the urgency and the shift in her demeanor. "Where are you exactly?" "I'm outside the storage building behind Franklin's Bakery," she explained, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush, trying to convey the situation as quickly as possible. "I can see Emily through the window. Franklin's been keeping her in a hidden room these past 2 years, and now he's planning to take her away tonight. He's loading a van right now. Do not approach them," Reynolds instructed firmly, his voice leaving no room for debate. "Stay where you are and keep observing. I'm sending units to your location immediately." Sarah watched in growing panic as Franklin grabbed Emily's arm, forcing her to quickly pack a small backpack, his movements rough and impatient. "Hurry up," she whispered, watching Franklin pull Emily toward the door of the hidden room, the escape imminent. "Units are on the way," he assured her, his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "Stay hidden and do not engage. I'll be there in less than 5 minutes." "Please hurry," Sarah pleaded softly, her gaze fixed on the window, not daring to look away for a second. "He's going to take her away." "Sarah, listen to me," Reynolds said firmly, his voice holding a note of urgency, a desperate attempt to convey the danger. "Do not approach Franklin. He's clearly dangerous, and you could put both yourself and Emily at risk. Wait for backup." Sarah knew he was right, every logical part of her screaming to obey, but fear, raw and visceral, gripped her as she watched Franklin roughly guiding Emily toward the storage building's door. They would be outside any moment, and if they made it to the vehicle she had spotted earlier, they could disappear into the night before the police arrived, the opportunity lost forever. "I'm 3 minutes out," Reynolds responded, his voice urgent. "Units should be arriving any second. Stay hidden." Sarah heard the faint wail of sirens in the distance, growing louder, but she worried they wouldn't arrive in time, that those crucial minutes would be too late. She watched, frozen in place, as Franklin opened the storage building door, checking outside before pulling Emily with him. They emerged into the pre-dawn darkness, Franklin gripping Emily's arm tightly as he hurried her toward the side of the building where the car was parked, his movements quick and determined. "We need to be on the road before anyone realizes we're gone," Franklin snapped, yanking Emily's arm when she hesitated, trying to resist. "Please don't do this," Emily begged, her voice carrying in the quiet dawn air, a sound that tore at Sarah's heart. "I want to go home." "You lost your chance when you put that bracelet in the bread," he said, his voice harsh, revealing the extent of his twisted possessiveness. "I took care of you when your mother abandoned you." "She didn't abandon me," Emily cried, her voice rising with anguish. "You took me from her." Franklin's face contorted with anger, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. "I saved you. Your mother wouldn't understand you like I do. All those books you love, who got them for you? Who built you a safe place? Who protected you from the world?" The sirens sounded closer now, the wailing growing rapidly louder. Franklin panicked, his head jerking toward the sound, his plans unraveling. He cursed under his breath and began shoving Emily toward the van more forcefully, his desperation mounting. "Get in now," he ordered, his voice rising with panic and fury. Sarah knew she couldn't wait any longer. If they drove away, they could vanish forever, lost to her again. Despite Reynolds's urgent warnings, despite the inherent danger, she stepped from the shadows of the alley, her voice, though trembling, clear and strong. "Emily," Sarah called, her voice breaking with 2 years of pent-up emotion, of longing and despair. They both froze. Franklin stopped dead in his tracks, his head snapping towards Sarah's voice. Emily's eyes widened, finding her mother's face in the dim light of the alley, a look of disbelief and overwhelming relief flooding her features. "Mom," she whispered, as if afraid to believe what she was seeing, afraid it was a cruel illusion. "Get in the van," Franklin ordered, his voice a harsh command. Yanking Emily's arm, trying to break the connection that had just been forged across the darkness. "Now let her go," Sarah said, stepping closer, her resolve hardening, her gaze fixed on Franklin. "The police are coming. It's over." Franklin's expression darkened, a look of desperate defiance replacing the panic. "She's mine now," he responded, pulling Emily more forcefully toward the van. "We have a life together. You'll never understand what we have." Emily twisted in his grip, trying desperately to break free, her eyes never leaving Sarah's face, her lifeline. "Mom," she cried again, reaching out with her free hand, a desperate plea. Sarah rushed forward, driven by a primal maternal instinct and the culmination of 2 long, agonizing years of searching. She grabbed Emily's outstretched hand, holding it tightly, a physical connection that defied Franklin's grasp. Franklin yanked Emily back, creating a desperate tug-of-war with the terrified girl caught in the middle, a horrifying scene playing out in the pre-dawn light. "Let go of her," he shouted at Sarah, his voice a guttural roar. "She belongs with me now. Let go of my daughter." Sarah shouted back, her voice filled with a fierce, protective rage, holding Emily's hand tightly, refusing to yield. She could feel her daughter trembling, could see tears streaming down her face in the dim light, tears of fear and relief. Police cars screeched into the alley behind the bakery, their lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue, a sudden, chaotic symphony of arrival. Officers emerged from the vehicles, weapons drawn, their voices sharp and commanding. "Police, don't move," an officer shouted, directing the command at Franklin. Franklin, realizing he was cornered, gave one last desperate push, trying to separate Sarah from Emily, to break their connection and make his escape. But Sarah maintained her iron grip on her daughter's hand, refusing to let go. When he realized he couldn't break their connection, couldn't escape with Emily, Franklin made a desperate break for the van, abandoning the girl in a frantic attempt to save himself. He managed only 3 steps before 2 officers tackled him to the ground, subduing him quickly. Franklin struggled briefly, shouting incoherently, before the officers gained control, snapping handcuffs around his wrists as he continued to protest and rail against his capture. Sarah held Emily close, both of them crying, tears of relief and shock washing over them as they sank to the ground, clinging to each other. After 2 years of separation, 2 years of unimaginable pain and searching, the reality of their reunion was overwhelming, a moment of pure, unadulterated joy amidst the chaos. Sarah touched Emily's face, her hair, her shoulders, her arms, as if to convince herself this was real, that her daughter was truly here, in her arms safe. "I tried to get away." Emily sobbed into her mother's shoulder, her voice muffled, the words a confession of her struggle. "I tried so many times." "You're safe now," Sarah assured her, stroking her hair, her voice a balm of comfort. "You're safe. I've got you." Detective Reynolds approached, his expression a mixture of amazement, relief, and a hint of fatherly concern. "I told you to wait," he said to Sarah, though there was no real anger in his voice, only understanding. He was going to take her away. She responded simply, not loosening her protective hold on Emily, unwilling to let her go even for a second. Reynolds nodded in understanding, acknowledging the impossible choice she had faced, the instinct that had driven her. He then knelt to Emily's level, his voice gentle and kind. "Hello, Emily," he said softly. "I'm Detective Reynolds. I've been looking for you for a very long time." Emergency medical personnel arrived on the scene to check Emily's condition, their presence a quiet hum of activity around the emotional reunion. Sarah kept hold of her daughter's hand as the paramedics examined her, unwilling to release her grip, unwilling to let her out of her sight even for a moment. The EMTs reported that Emily appeared physically unharmed, a small miracle, but recommended a full examination at the hospital to ensure her well-being after her ordeal. "I want to go home," Emily said quietly, her voice small and weary. "We need to make a stop at the hospital first," Sarah explained gently, her heart aching at Emily's simple request. "And the police need to ask you some questions. But then we'll go home. I promise. Soon. We need to get her statement while everything's fresh," Reynolds explained gently to Sarah as the paramedics finished their assessment, preparing to transport Emily. "I promise to keep it brief for today." Emily clung to her mother as they were guided into a police cruiser, the mundane act of getting into a car feeling surreal after everything they had just experienced. The ride to the station passed in a blur of emotion, Sarah staring at her daughter's profile in disbelief, afraid she might disappear if she looked away, even for a moment. She noticed the changes in Emily's face, still her daughter, undoubtedly, but somehow older than her 14 years, her expression carrying a weariness, a shadow of her captivity, that broke Sarah's heart. At the station, they were ushered through a side entrance, a deliberate move to avoid the reporters who had already begun to gather at the main doors, alerted by scanner chatter about a missing child found alive after 2 years. Reynolds personally escorted them to an interview room designed to be less intimidating than a standard interrogation space. Softer lighting, comfortable chairs, a small table with water bottles and tissues, an attempt to create a calming environment in the midst of the storm. Sarah sat beside Emily in the interview room, her arm protectively around her daughter's shoulders, a constant physical reassurance. The fluorescent lights still cast harsh shadows under Emily's eyes, highlighting her exhaustion. But Sarah couldn't stop looking at her, couldn't believe she was really here, safe beside her. Detective Reynolds sat across from them, his notebook open, but his manner gentle and patient as he began the questioning, allowing Emily to speak at her own pace. Emily sat wrapped in a soft blanket the officers had provided, a cup of hot chocolate warming her hands, a small comfort in the sterile room. Sarah remained beside her, their shoulders touching, a silent show of solidarity and support, as Detective Reynolds gently questioned her about her captivity, piecing together the missing years. Emily explained how Franklin had lured her away at the market 2 years ago, his voice kind and reassuring, telling her that her mother had been in an accident and he was supposed to take her to the hospital, a cruel lie that preyed on her fear and trust. By the time I realized we weren't going to the hospital, we were already at the bakery, Emily said, her voice soft, recounting the terrifying realization. He locked me in that room behind the storage building. He told me you didn't want me anymore, that you were glad I was gone. Sarah made a small, choked sound of distress, her heart aching at the lie Franklin had fed her daughter, and Emily squeezed her hand, a silent reassurance. I didn't believe him, Emily continued, her voice gaining a little strength. Not really, but he took my phone, and I couldn't get out. The door had a code lock, and the window was too small. The small room, the limited access, the constant fear. Emily described the isolation of her captivity. He said if I tried to escape, he'd hurt you. How did your bracelet end up in the bread? Reynolds asked, his voice gentle, focusing on the clue that had led them here. He made me help with the bread sometimes, Emily explained, her gaze distant as she recalled the forced labor. When he wasn't looking, I dropped my bracelet in the dough. A faint, defiant spark entered her eyes. I remembered what Mom taught me about leaving clues if I was ever lost. Sarah's eyes filled with tears at this revelation, tears of pride and overwhelming love. Her daughter, just 12 years old, had remembered the safety lessons they had practiced years ago, lessons about what to do if she ever found herself lost or in danger. She had applied that knowledge in the most ingenious and unexpected way possible. I wasn't sure it would work, Emily admitted, her voice regaining a little more of its natural cadence. I thought the bracelet might melt in the oven, or that no one would find it, or that it would just get thrown away. But I had to try something. It was the only way I could think of. Sarah looked at her daughter with a mixture of wonder and profound admiration. Emily, she said softly, still processing the miracle of having her daughter beside her, safe. Putting the bracelet in the dough. That was so brave, so incredibly clever. She paused, studying her daughter's face, the subtle changes that 2 years had etched there. But honey, how did you know it wouldn't melt in that hot oven? Emily met her mother's gaze, a flicker of her former self, the curious, intelligent girl, showing through the exhaustion and trauma. I wasn't sure, Mom, she admitted, but I remembered you telling me the pendant was amethyst, a type of quartz, and the beads were glass. You said they were strong. She recalled the details of a conversation from years before, a seemingly insignificant moment that had held a hidden lesson. And the cord wasn't just plastic. You said it was a strong, special fiber, heat-resistant. Sarah remembered that day clearly, Emily admiring the bracelet in the store window, Sarah explaining why the slightly higher price was worth it for quality materials, materials that could withstand the heat of a baker's oven and become a beacon of hope. Tears of pride welled in Sarah's eyes, mingling with the lingering tears of relief. "Oh, Emily," she whispered, hugging her gently, carefully. "You were so smart, so incredibly brave." Detective Reynolds nodded in agreement, his own eyes shining with emotion. She absolutely was. That clue, Emily, that single act of defiance and hope, that's what brought you home. The ensuing investigation revealed the full extent of George Franklin's double life. A respected, seemingly ordinary baker who had secretly kept Emily isolated for 2 long years, feeding her lies, convincing her that her family had abandoned her. In his twisted, delusional mind, he had convinced himself that he was rescuing Emily, providing her with the books she loved, creating a safe space for her away from a world he deemed dangerous and uncaring. "He kept bringing me those Moonstone books," Emily explained, the memory a source of both comfort and manipulation during her captivity. "He said they were my favorites, and that proved he knew me better than anyone else." She paused, a flicker of anger in her eyes. He was so mad when I told him I'd already read them all, even the ones he thought were new to me. As the questioning continued, Sarah learned the full, heartbreaking extent of her daughter's captivity. The small hidden room where she had spent most of 2 years, allowed out only occasionally to help in the bakery when no one else was around, a carefully guarded secret. She had been given enough food and basic necessities, kept physically unharmed, but denied freedom, denied contact with the outside world, denied her childhood. The resilience Emily had shown, maintaining hope through those long months, searching for ways to signal her presence, culminating in the inspired, desperate act of placing her bracelet in the bread dough. It filled Sarah with both profound heartbreak for what her daughter had endured and an overwhelming sense of pride in her STR. Ink and cleverness. Reynolds closed his notebook, explaining they would need more detailed statements later, once Emily had rested and processed some of the trauma, but the basics were sufficient for now. Officers had already seized Franklin's computer from the bakery, finding disturbing evidence of his obsession with Emily and his meticulous planning of her abduction and captivity. "Will I have to see him again?" Emily asked quietly, her voice small and fragile, a residual fear lingering in her eyes. In court, Reynolds shook his head reassuringly, his gaze kind. "We're doing everything possible to avoid that, Emily. Franklin is already talking, hoping for leniency in sentencing. We have more than enough evidence without putting you through the trauma of a trial." Relief washed over Emily's face at the thought of not having to confront her captor again. "Good," she said softly. "I don't want to see him ever again." "You won't have to, honey," Sarah assured her, squeezing her hand, a promise she intended to keep. A police psychologist had already spoken briefly with Emily, explaining to Sarah afterward that the road to recovery would take time, that the emotional and psychological scars of 2 years of isolation would require healing. Emily had spent 2 formative years from the ages of 12 to 14 in isolation, missing school, missing friends, missing the crucial experiences of normal development. There would be adjustments, therapy, possibly setbacks along the way. But the doctor had also emphasized Emily's remarkable resilience, a strength evidenced by her clever escape plan, a testament to her inner fortitude. As they left the police station, the pale morning light filtered through the high windows, casting long, soft shadows across the parking lot. Sarah kept her arms securely around Emily's shoulders, feeling how thin she had become, a physical reminder of the ordeal she had endured. The road ahead would be long, filled with the process of healing from invisible scars, with therapy and difficult conversations, with rebuilding the life that had been stolen. But they would face it together, mother and daughter, side by side. For the first time in 2 years, Sarah's heart felt complete, whole again. Her daughter was home. Thank you for taking the time to read this story. If you found it compelling, please consider subscribing to our channel for more stories of courage, resilience, and hope.